Oh, the Maine quarter. Well, yeah, that was 2 years after I did the New York and Rhode Island quarters. And what had happened is I was sort of an exception to the rule back when I did the 2001 state quarters. But the Mint had a policy at the time. The Maine state quarter was, it was being decided upon as far as its design. The Mint had a policy in effect that people really weren't aware of, that the Mint would not accept artwork from any states. They would refuse any actual artwork. All they wanted was the narratives or the description of 3 to 5 themes that the state would want for the quarter. The Mint wanted total control over the artwork and didn't want to accept anything from outside the Mint. But no one really knew that at the time. But I have good friends of mine who live in Maine, and we kind of got together and I did the design. And they made suggestions for it on me, and then they submitted it. And it turned out that was this design that the state chose. And they told the Mint, okay, here's the design. This is what we want. And the Mint said, well, we'll accept your artwork, but we'll tell our artist to do, the Pemmican Point Lighthouse with the schooner on there. Well, the Mint's version riled a lot of people in Maine because they put the lighthouse up on a cliff that really doesn't exist. They turned the 3-mast schooner, which was the Victory Chimes, a National Historic Landmark. It still sails the coast of Maine. They turned that 3-mast schooner into a 2-masted schooner, anonymous 2-masted schooner, and they put seagulls on there, which people in Maine don't particularly care for either. So people in Maine were really, not happy with the Mint on that. But the Mint, they relented only in that they changed the rocks, the shape of the rocks on the cliff, and they did go in and add a 3rd mast to the ship. Very, very small. The ship is pretty small on that coin. But that's all that they would do. They wouldn't. They really didn't want to budge as far as the way their design goes. Once these designs get reviewed and whatnot, and the Mint is very reluctant to make any changes.
Do you think it was almost an assertive thing of saying we're the final say on how it's going to be done?
Yeah, I think it's they were worried about I don't know if they were worried so much about copyright issues. I mean, they could have asked me and said, well, we're worried about copyright issues on this Maine design. I said, well, I created it. I'll sign the copyright over to you. But of course, they didn't want to ask. They don't want to deal with that. So what they did was, Maine sent their information to the Mint, and the Mint, I don't know if they sent the actual rendering with it or not, but if they did, the Mint would not have shown that or let the Mint artist see it. They would have just said, okay, Mint artist, do a design of the Pemmican Point Lighthouse. And in a way, it would have been similar to like when I was invited to do the 2001 state quarters. I was given a list of 3 to 5 written themes, suggested themes for each coin. And I'm sure that the people that are working on the 2003 state quarters were also given that. And I'm sure that I could just envision one of the things on the list would be, the Pemmican Point Lighthouse with a schooner.
Right, but not any particular ship.
Maybe not. But I mean, the design I did had this specific ship in it, and I don't know if that would have been put in the narrative or not. But it didn't end. The right ship did not end up on there in the first round, and they go and add a 3rd mast to it. Yeah, that's sort of an interesting story. If you really study the fine print on them over the years, you can pretty much conclude what really happened with the Great Depression just by looking at what's on the Federal Reserve notes. Yeah, I mean, if you look at Federal Reserve notes. The first ones came out in 1914. They said redeemable in gold on demand. But what happened is, they inflated, or the money supply. They're basically responsible for the Roaring '20s. And what happened is that they issued, all of a sudden, a lot more money came into being, and all these new notes that were printed, they all said redeemable in gold on demand. But what happened was, eventually, foreign banks especially wanted to start redeeming these notes for the gold. Problem is that since the government at that time, they had obligations to deliver gold. It wasn't just like they can't just print dollars out of thin air. They had obligations to deliver gold because the notes were issued as redeemable in gold on demand. So what happened is, they had to, in some ways they may have even initiated the Great Depression, but Roosevelt comes along and confiscates all the gold, basically so that they could cover their obligations that they made, that they would cover the obligations that they made to foreign banks.
Yeah, they took it from the people to give to the foreign investors.
To fulfill their obligation to foreign banks that had been holding a lot of these Federal Reserve notes. And of course, right after they confiscated the gold, of course, what does Roosevelt do? He revalues it higher. I mean, it could have been nice and revalued it first,
right,
and paid people that amount when they confiscated it. But no, he's got to confiscate it first and then revalue it right after he confiscated it all. But, of course, then the Federal Reserve notes then, of course, no longer said redeemable gold on demand. But people worry about the gold confiscation today, and it's a different situation because today the government might find itself in such dire straits, that needs to finance itself somehow, which would probably mean taxes. But they wouldn't. I don't think they would confiscate gold because they do not have obligations, at least not that we know of, that they owe gold to someone else. They owe dollars, they're treasury bonds, but they can print the money on it. They never pay us off if they absolutely had to.
Late 60s, early 70s was a similar thing where foreign banks were also looking to cash in that gold.
Well, yes, that's right, because the dollar still did have some gold backing, not to American citizens, but only to foreign banks, large foreign banks, and they were starting to cash in on that, and that's when Nixon closed the gold window. That means to cut that off. But all along, they were really, of course, the Depression and then more in the 1970s, they were really worried about, the American citizens losing faith in the currency and demanding gold, because that would have been way more demand for gold than the foreign banks would have been. They couldn't let that happen, so that's probably why they did that.
Even before the Federal Reserve notes backed in gold, we had silver certificates and things like that. There was
actually had silver certificates up until 1957, and they could be redeemed for silver up until 1968 or so, and then that stopped. But if you look back, you'll notice that the silver certificates were generally the smallest denomination. The Federal Reserve notes were the big denominations, from $20 to $10,000. Those were all Federal Reserve notes. The only silver certificates were like 1, 5, 10, the small ones. But there's also the United States notes, which are Treasury issued notes, and they had a red seal on them. And most people don't really know much about those, but they made quite a few of those. But those tended to be smaller denominations. Although it's kind of strange, in 1966 they came out with some $100 United States notes. They were not Federal Reserve notes. They were United States notes. They were $100 denomination in 1966, and they had a red seal and red serial numbers, but otherwise they looked like the Federal Reserve notes at the time.
Those were very limited production, right?
Fairly limited. Some people think, well, that was Kennedy wanted to get off the Federal Reserve, and that's why he was shot. That's what one theory is. I have no idea of anything with that, but
I know that Kennedy had, worked to actually put out those Treasury notes. After that pretty much stopped the production of those, right? Regardless.
Yeah, I think they had got the wheels in motion to make those, and then for whatever reason they still went ahead and came out with some in 1966, but they didn't make very many, of course, and they're collectible nowadays, of course. But I don't know. I don't have any knowledge of what Kennedy did in that regard. But all I heard one time was that he wanted the United States Treasury to issue the money, at least some money, and not just have the Federal Reserve issue all the money.
Right, at least a competing currency, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Ron Paul is proposing that were he to be elected, obviously, that was one of the things he would do, is not to just shut the Federal Reserve down overnight, but to introduce a competing currency that would be backed by gold and silver, to at least give people that option.
Right.
That they can choose how to invest.
Yeah, I've heard that, and that would be interesting. Although I just would wonder, what's going to happen? Some kind of incident, something's going to happen here. They pulled some funky thing to discredit Ross Perot, and I think they would, that he kind of fell for it too, unfortunately. But I think they might do the same kind of thing here. But I don't know. It's all conspiracy talk. Some of it's probably true, though.
Yeah, that's the sick thing is, conspiracy has become such a term. People forget there's actual laws. We have laws to put, mafia away for conspiracy or conspiracy to commit murder or whatever it is. There's also collusion is illegal. But, just even saying words like that, kind of set off alarms in people's heads. And that's something that this even sounds conspiracy theorist in itself, but they actually have managed to control the vernacular in such a way that those terms are meant to kind of make people seem discredited automatically. You mentioned Ross Perot. I think Ross Perot also, but I also wonder, like you said, he was kind of played off a little bit.
Well, there was something. The thing, it seems his downfall seemed to be some incident about how he was like talking about somebody in the middle of the night was outside his house or something, doing something funny or making some noise. I don't know. The media played him off as being kind of wacky for whatever all that was, and And that wouldn't surprise me if somebody was, really out there doing something like that, just hoping that he would come off wacky talking about it.
I think that is a very real possibility that whether it's done through the media or something more severe, obviously there will be an effort. People will try to maintain their interests.